At a house party, I heard moaning from the guest bathroom. When I pushed the door, my fiancée was bent over the sink with a guy behind her. He said, "Dude, close the door." Then, the night of Warren's house party was supposed to be the kind of harmless get-together people forget about by the next morning. I came there with Kendall because she had spent the whole week saying she needed a distraction. I assumed she meant from work stress, not from me, so I agreed without thinking too much. Warren's place sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, glowing with string lights and music that spilled out onto the driveway. Cars lined both sides of the street. Groups of people drifted in and out of the living room. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested my entire life was about to fracture inside a guest bathroom. Kendall walked in ahead of me, greeting people like she had planned this moment for weeks. She loved environments where she could be the center of something without appearing to force it. She always knew the right tone, the right smile, the right lines to deliver whenever she wanted to charm a room. I never minded that part of her personality, because she used to include me in it. Lately, though, she drifted toward social circles where I felt unnecessary. I chalked the change up to stress. She had been talking about burnout for months. Every conversation we had about it circled back to how she wanted to feel alive again. Those were her exact words. I didn't know what they meant to her until later. We made our way through the living room. Warren spotted me and pulled me into one of his overly enthusiastic hugs. He started talking about the music setup, the barbecue planned for later, and a strange argument he had with a neighbor about parking. The usual. Nothing in his expression suggested he knew anything about what would happen later in his own house. Kendall drifted into a circle of people she recognized from a previous party. She didn't look back at me. I didn't take it personally at the time because she got along with them better than I did. After a while, I realized I hadn't seen Kendall for several minutes. I assumed she stepped outside for fresh air or was talking to someone in the kitchen, so I moved around the house, greeting people and checking for her casually. The kitchen was packed. The patio was full. The upstairs hallway had people sitting on the carpet, talking about some show they were addicted to. None of them had seen her. I didn't panic. Relationships breathe better when both people get space in social situations. I trusted her enough to assume she was grabbing a drink or using the bathroom. It wasn't until I walked down the hallway toward the guest bedrooms that something unsettled me. The sound wasn't obvious at first because the music from downstairs masked much of it. I only heard it because someone lowered the volume while switching playlists. The moment the music dipped, I caught a faint rhythmic pattern, like restrained breathing, mixed with something more. Then a muffled thud against porcelain. Then something unmistakable. A low moan. I paused in the hallway, wondering if someone was drunk and getting sick. It wouldn't be the first time a guest bathroom became a zone for fixing poor decisions. I moved closer with the intention of checking whether someone needed help. I'm not the kind of person who ignores that kind of stuff. But as I got closer, the sounds became clearer and layered in a way that removed any ambiguity. That moan wasn't from someone feeling ill. That was someone lost in something entirely different. I reached the door before I consciously decided to open it. I didn't overthink. I didn't suspect anything specific. My mind went blank and practical. I just pushed in. The door didn't budge. Someone was holding the handle from the inside. A second later, the resistance eased, and the door opened a few inches, just enough for a sliver of light to strike my shoes. That was when I heard a man's voice from deeper inside the room. His tone was casual, almost annoyed. "Dude, close the door." I didn't close it. I pushed harder. The door opened wider. The bathroom light hit me directly, and the scene inside froze me mid-breath. Kendall was bent over the sink. Her hands were gripping the edges. Her dress was hiked up around her hips. A guy I had never seen before was behind her, his shirt half off, his body pressed against hers. He froze when he saw my face. Kendall twisted around, her expression flipping through shock, panic, irritation, and something else I couldn't process. All three of us stayed like that, suspended in disbelief. The guy stepped back and muttered something, but Kendall cut him off. She turned toward me, pulling her dress down while stumbling through a half-formed explanation that didn't match her own expression. She tried to talk about how the alcohol hit her faster than she expected. She tried to claim they were talking, and one thing led to another. She tried to minimize everything while still catching her breath from what she had been doing seconds earlier. I walked into the room without a word. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an explanation. I looked at the guy first. He raised his hands and stepped to the side. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't smug. He looked like someone who realized he stepped into a situation he never intended to be part of. Kendall pointed at me, telling him to give her a second. He didn't argue. He squeezed past me and left quickly. That left the two of us alone. She kept talking because silence made her nervous. Whenever she feared losing control, she flooded the air with words. She started explaining how she and the guy only talked a few times before this. She said she didn't plan for anything to happen. She said she felt disconnected lately and made a terrible decision in a moment of weakness. None of the sentences formed anything reliable or stable. I didn't respond. I looked down and noticed her phone on the bathroom counter. That phone had been glued to her hand for months. She claimed she needed it for work updates. Seeing it unattended felt unnatural. The screen lit up while I stared at it. A message preview appeared from some name I didn't recognize. Then another. Then a third. The tone of the messages didn't sound like casual acquaintances. Kendall noticed where I was looking and reached for the phone quickly. That sudden urgency told me more than anything she had said so far. She didn't want me to read whatever was coming through. She backtracked instantly, shifting into defensive mode. She said we could talk at home. She said we didn't need to create a scene. She said I was misinterpreting things. She kept stacking sentences that aimed to move the moment somewhere else so she could regain an advantage. But the moment had already crossed a line. There was no coming back to neutral ground. I walked out of the bathroom. She followed me into the hallway, trying to grab my arm. Her voice rose as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. People began looking over from the other rooms. Warren stepped out of the living room, confused. He didn't know what happened yet, but he could read the tension instantly. Kendall saw the attention on us and shifted tactics again. She tried to act wounded, then overwhelmed, then embarrassed. I didn't stop walking. I moved past Warren and headed for the front door. Kendall stayed behind, caught between chasing me and staying to repair her image in front of the crowd. That hesitation told me where her priorities leaned. Once I stepped outside, the cold air felt sharper than usual. My mind wasn't racing. It wasn't spiraling. It was rebooting. The life I had walked into that house with no longer matched the one I walked out with. I reached my car and sat inside without starting the engine. The everything of what I saw replayed in my mind. The position she was in, the focus on her face, the man behind her, the reflex she had to hide her phone the moment I looked at it. There wasn't a single angle I could twist this into something less than what it was. When I finally started the engine, I knew one thing clearly. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This wasn't a sudden lapse in judgment. This was a pattern, and patterns don't form out of nowhere. I drove off without calling her, without texting, without thinking about what she might tell people inside the house. None of it mattered. She didn't know what I saw in her expression when she realized her phone betrayed her. She didn't know what I noticed in that brief moment when 3 messages came through from 3 different men. She didn't know that the part of me that trusted her had already died before I even left the driveway. But I knew, and I knew I wasn't done. I didn't sleep the night of the party. I didn't expect to. My mind wasn't looping the bathroom scene anymore. That shock had already hardened into something sharper. What kept me awake was the way Kendall reacted afterward. When someone gets caught doing something they regret, there is usually a moment where guilt bleeds through their panic. Kendall skipped guilt entirely. She went straight to strategy. That part of the night replayed louder than anything that happened in the bathroom. By the time the sky started turning pale around the edges, I already knew I couldn't go home. Kendall would be waiting. She would have rehearsed a new version of the story, one that sounded polished and emotionally loaded. She would try to cry without letting her voice crack. She had always used precision when she wanted someone to believe her, and I wasn't in a place to be manipulated. So I drove to Warren's place again, but I didn't go inside. I texted him instead, asking if he could meet me outside. He came out within minutes, still half asleep, wearing a hoodie and mismatched socks. One look at me, and he didn't ask anything. He climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door gently, as if he already sensed how fragile the moment felt. I told him everything. Not in a dramatic way, not in a shaking voice way, just straight. He sat still through the entire explanation, his expression tightening each time he processed another detail. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in the seat and let out a long breath. He said he always thought Kendall enjoyed attention too much, but never imagined she would go that far. He mentioned something that surprised me. She had disappeared at one of his previous parties for almost an hour, and when she returned, she looked like she just ran a marathon. He had assumed she was crying or upset about something. Now he wondered if that wasn't the case at all. The more he talked, the more pieces started fitting into place, and the more I realized how many signs I had rationalized away. Warren offered me his spare room for as long as I needed it. I agreed. I wasn't ready to face Kendall. I wasn't ready to give her any platform where she could twist the truth. Warren called into work to take the day off. I did the same. Neither of us wanted to deal with anything except the obvious. Kendall didn't message me until late morning. The first text acted as if nothing happened. The second one pretended she was confused about where I slept. The third one tried to set a trap. She asked why I left her at the party without saying anything. In her version, she was the confused one. She was the abandoned one. She was the person who deserved an explanation. I didn't respond. Around noon, I received a call. I didn't answer that either. Kendall followed with a voice message that I refused to open. It didn't matter what she said. Any message she sent now would be something designed to anchor me emotionally. Warren suggested we step out of the house to clear the air. We drove to a small diner we used to go to after late-night shifts years ago. The place still had the same old ceiling fans and worn-out booths. It felt familiar enough to help me think. While we waited for our food, a thought struck me that I couldn't ignore. Kendall's phone had lit up with messages from 3 different men in the bathroom. Those names weren't familiar, which meant these weren't people from our shared social circles. That meant she was building connections somewhere else entirely. That also meant there were patterns and behaviors I hadn't seen because she kept them carefully separated. I didn't want to do detective work. I didn't want to start digging through her life like someone obsessed with gathering evidence. But I needed to understand how long this had been going on. I needed to know whether the relationship I had been in was real or just a placeholder she occupied until something more exciting came along. So I texted someone I never would have contacted under any other circumstances. A coworker of Kendall's named Shauna. Shauna and Kendall weren't close friends, but they worked the same department and occasionally exchanged rides when one of their cars was in the shop. I asked her if she had a minute to talk. She responded almost immediately, saying she was on her break. I stepped outside the diner to call her. The moment she heard my voice, she sounded concerned. I didn't go into explicit detail, but I told her there had been a major issue between me and Kendall, and I needed clarity about a few things. Shauna hesitated, but eventually spoke. She said Kendall had been disappearing during lunch breaks for months. Sometimes she left early and returned late, always with a different excuse. She had also been coming to work in noticeably different moods, sometimes euphoric, sometimes irritated, sometimes drained. Shauna said people in the office joked that Kendall had a secret life, though they never meant it literally. I listened quietly, absorbing every detail without reacting. Then Shauna mentioned something that sent a cold wave through my stomach. Kendall had been talking about needing to get out of her apartment situation because it was emotionally suffocating. She never mentioned my name in those conversations, but the implication was painfully clear. I thanked her and ended the call. When I returned to the diner booth, Warren noticed something in my face shift. I told him everything. He shook his head, mumbling that Kendall had been building a story about me long before the bathroom incident. That part felt like a punch because it confirmed something I didn't want to accept. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was preparing an exit that would leave me looking like the problem. We finished our food and went back to Warren's place. I checked my phone again. This time there were 10 missed calls and a long text from Kendall saying she was scared because she didn't know where I was and she needed us to talk. Her version of the bathroom scene was already changing. She said she was drunk and vulnerable. She said the guy had taken advantage of the moment. She said she didn't remember half of it. She said she didn't feel safe with me ignoring her. It was incredible how easily she rewrote the story so she could fit into the role of the wounded one. I put the phone down without responding. Later that evening, Warren asked if I wanted to swing by the apartment to grab some essentials. He came with me because he didn't want to leave me alone around Kendall. We drove to the place. Parking felt surreal because everything looked normal from the outside. Nothing about the physical space reflected the turmoil underneath. Kendall's car wasn't there. That gave me some relief. I entered the apartment with Warren and headed straight for the bedroom. I packed clothes, shoes, chargers, toiletries, and a few personal items. I didn't want anything that belonged to both of us. I didn't want the shared objects that had sentimental weight. I wanted distance. Halfway through packing, I opened the drawer where she used to keep bills, receipts, and work documents. I didn't mean to look. I only opened it because I stored some of my things there too. But what I found stopped me. There were printed hotel receipts under a different name. Not my name. Not hers. Someone named D. Hartley. The email listed underneath didn't belong to either of us. I looked through the stack. There were several receipts, all from the past few months. They weren't from places around work. They were spread across different neighborhoods. Warren leaned over my shoulder. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. This wasn't about curiosity anymore. This wasn't about trying to understand. This was confirmation that the bathroom incident wasn't a slip or a mistake or a moment that spiraled out of control. She had been maintaining a separate routine, a separate life, a separate network. As I stood there holding the receipts, something steadied inside me. Nothing Kendall could say now would distort the truth. Nothing she tried to spin would erase the pattern in front of me. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the threshold of something much larger. And I hadn't even spoken to the man from the bathroom yet. I didn't expect to hear from the guy in the bathroom. I assumed he would disappear the second he realized I had seen everything. People who get caught in that kind of situation usually retreat into silence and pretend they were never involved. That is why his message shocked me when it arrived the following afternoon. He introduced himself as Griffin. He apologized for what happened, not in a dramatic way, but in a straightforward and uncomfortable one. He said he didn't want to fight, didn't want drama, didn't want any misunderstanding. And then he wrote something that made my hand tighten around my phone. He asked if Kendall was still planning to tell me about the baby. I reread the text several times because the words didn't fully register at first. My mind tried to make sense of the phrasing. Baby? Plan to tell me? Why would she talk about that with him? Why would he think she was going to involve me? None of it added up. My pulse jumped in a way it hadn't since the night of the party. I took a breath and called him. He answered immediately. He sounded nervous, but not defensive. He said Kendall had been telling him she might be pregnant and that they needed to talk about what this meant. He said he didn't know she was engaged. He didn't know she lived with someone. He didn't know anything about my existence until the bathroom door swung open. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't trying to justify himself. He was embarrassed and confused. He admitted that Kendall told him she was single from the very beginning. She even claimed she was avoiding dating because she wasn't ready for another serious relationship. Everything in their dynamic pointed to a casual arrangement that occasionally drifted into emotional territory. But the moment she told him about a possible pregnancy, he panicked. He said he needed clarity before committing to anything. Kendall told him she was taking a test that weekend and she would explain everything soon. Then the bathroom incident happened. He sounded relieved he didn't have to continue the conversation, but he also sounded genuinely bothered by the idea that he had somehow become tangled in manipulation he never signed up for. I kept my voice steady. I asked him one question. Did she tell him who the father was supposed to be? He paused longer than necessary. Then he admitted she implied it was him. That was enough to confirm what I already suspected. Kendall wasn't improvising that night in the bathroom. She had a system. Multiple men. Different stories. Different emotional hooks. She shaped herself differently, depending on what she wanted from each person. I wasn't dealing with a one-time betrayal. I was dealing with someone who created entire narratives to keep multiple lives running in parallel. I thanked him for the honesty. He said he wished we had met under normal circumstances. He hung up after saying he planned to cut all contact with her. When I returned inside Warren's living room, my face must have revealed enough. He muted the TV and waited. I explained the entire call. His expression darkened the more I spoke. He said we needed to be careful now, because Kendall was the type to flip a story into something with teeth if she felt cornered. He reminded me she had already started describing me as emotionally suffocating to her coworkers. That wasn't an accident. She was laying groundwork. If she was willing to manipulate her lovers with talk of pregnancy, she would have no problem painting me as unstable if she needed a route to sympathy. We sat in silence for a moment, processing our next steps. I wasn't trying to ruin Kendall. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I simply refused to let her twist reality into something where I became the villain she had been preparing to reveal. Later that evening, something else happened that added fuel to the fire. I received a message from Shauna, the coworker who had given me some insight earlier. It wasn't a long message. It was just a screenshot of something she found while sorting through shared office printouts. It was a page that looked copied straight from Kendall's search history. The top line read, "How to remove someone from a lease without their consent." Below that were articles about tenant rights, legal loopholes, and strategies for taking over rental agreements. The timestamp was 3 weeks old. I didn't react right away because the implications were heavy. This wasn't a matter of cheating anymore. She was preparing to sever our shared life in a way that would leave me responsible for whatever narrative she spun. Warren read the screenshot over my shoulder. He said nothing at first. Then he stood up slowly and asked whether I wanted to confront her tonight or wait until I understood the full picture. I wanted answers, but I needed to keep control of the situation. Kendall operated best when she blindsided people. If she had time to shape a story, she could sway almost anyone. She was charismatic, good-looking, and skilled at choosing the right moments to appear fragile. I didn't want her performing for me. I wanted her cornered by the truth. Before we could plan anything, Kendall started calling Warren. Not me. Warren. She knew I was staying with him. She likely heard from someone at the party that I left early and never returned home. She had probably built an entire new explanation for why that was my fault. Warren didn't pick up. She called again. He ignored it. She texted him that she was outside his house. Then she knocked on the door. Warren looked at me. I nodded. We didn't open. Kendall's voice carried through the door, urgent and polished. She said she only wanted to talk. She said she wanted to explain. She said she didn't want anyone else involved. She said she was worried about me. She said I hadn't been myself lately. Every sentence was handcrafted to manipulate whoever stood behind the door. Warren opened the blinds quietly. Kendall was standing on the porch wearing a sweatshirt and leggings, not crying, but trying to look like she had just finished crying. She knocked again and stepped back, checking the windows. When she realized we weren't opening, her voice shifted. She started talking louder, saying she needed to clear her name because she didn't want rumors spreading around our friend group. She said people misunderstood the bathroom situation. She said the guy had come on too strong, and she froze. Then she claimed she didn't remember anything. Her story kept shifting even though she believed no one could hear her. She knocked one last time, stepped off the porch, and sat in her car for a long moment. Then she drove away. I didn't say a word for a while. Warren didn't either. Everything about her visit felt tactical, not emotional. That night, I decided to reach out to one more person, the second man whose name flashed on Kendall's phone in the bathroom. I found him through social media with minimal effort. His account was public, and his profile picture matched the name. I didn't send accusations. I simply asked if he knew Kendall was engaged. He responded within minutes. He didn't know. I didn't need to tell him the rest. He told me enough. Kendall had told him she was recovering from a messy breakup with a controlling guy. He said she implied the relationship ended because she had chosen her mental health over a toxic situation. She didn't give him a name, but she described me. I thanked him for his time. At that point, the truth wasn't surprising anymore, but each confirmation sank deeper. She had been preparing the stage for months. She built a version of me for strangers so that when she finally ended things, no one would question her. And the part that chilled me the most? None of this was reactive. None of this was emotional chaos. It was strategy. The next morning, I woke up with the clearest sense of purpose I had felt in years. Not anger, not heartbreak, just clarity. If Kendall wanted a story, I needed to make sure the real one reached everyone she had lied to. I wasn't going to break anyone's life apart, but I wasn't going to let her carve mine to pieces either. Part 3 ended with something new forming inside me. Not revenge, but a need for resolution that wouldn't leave any loose ends for her to twist later. And there was still one final person I had to talk to. The guy she told was the father. I didn't approach Griffin again immediately. I wanted time to think. I wanted the space to understand what kind of person could run parallel lives with that level of confidence. But the more I considered the situation, the more it became clear that Kendall's pattern wouldn't stop on its own. She had been constructing a foundation that allowed her to rewrite any scenario in her favor. If I didn't address everything directly, she would keep adjusting the story until I became the unbalanced partner who abandoned her for no reason. I wasn't going to give her that opening. The next day, I asked Griffin to meet in person. He agreed without hesitation. We met at a coffee place on the edge of town, far enough from mutual circles that Kendall wouldn't run into us. He looked tired, not guilty but strained from the weight of having been dragged into something he didn't understand. When I sat down, he didn't start with apologies or excuses. He simply asked what I needed from him. I wanted clarity. I wanted details. I wanted the full picture from one of the people she had manipulated so easily. He told me he met Kendall through a gym she occasionally visited after work. He said their connection grew fast because she was bold and unpredictable in ways that felt exciting at first. She told him she loved spontaneity. She told him she didn't want anything serious, but also hinted that she was open to something deeper if the timing felt right. He admitted he fell for that charm because she made him feel chosen, special in a way he hadn't experienced in years. And then he added something that made me sit still. She told him she was grateful he wasn't like the controlling guy she used to live with. The implication was obvious. I wasn't angry at him. He didn't steal anything from me. He had been constructed into the narrative she needed him to believe. He explained the pregnancy talk as something she introduced when she sensed him drifting emotionally. She wanted to keep him close. She wanted leverage. He didn't know if she was actually pregnant or manipulating the idea. He suspected the latter. By the time we finished talking, I had everything I needed to understand the scale of her behavior. She wasn't careless. She wasn't confused. She wasn't unstable or overwhelmed. She was deliberate. She moved people around like pieces on a board, shaping different versions of herself depending on who she wanted to hold on to. If the pregnancy angle worked, she would have anchored Griffin. If the controlling boyfriend angle worked, she would have anchored sympathy at work. If the bathroom scenario had gone unseen, she would have anchored another layer of secrecy. I thanked Griffin and told him I wasn't seeking revenge. I simply wanted the truth to stand on its own so nobody else got pulled into the same cycle. He nodded, relieved this wasn't going further than facts. The final confrontation with Kendall came the following evening. I didn't meet her alone. I asked Warren if we could use his living room for a conversation. He agreed immediately. I also asked Griffin to come, because he deserved closure as much as I did. He hesitated but eventually said yes. The plan wasn't theatrical. It wasn't dramatic for the sake of drama. It was simply necessary. I texted Kendall that we needed to talk in a neutral place. She responded fast. She suggested she could cook dinner at the apartment, and we could reconnect. That suggestion alone confirmed she had rehearsed a reconciliation scene without understanding that reconciliation required honesty first. I didn't explain anything. I just told her to meet at Warren's place at 8. She arrived on time, wearing a soft expression and an outfit chosen specifically to appear vulnerable without seeming messy. Kendall always understood presentation. She smiled when she saw me, But that smile fell apart when she noticed Warren and Griffin sitting behind me. She asked what was going on. I told her we all needed clarity. She said she didn't feel comfortable talking in front of them. I said comfort wasn't the goal. Truth was. Her voice shifted immediately. She tried to take control, asking why I was dragging strangers into our private matters. I reminded her Griffin wasn't a stranger to her. She looked at him only briefly before turning back to me, as if he were a prop she preferred not to acknowledge. Griffin didn't speak. Not yet. I explained what he told me. I explained the pregnancy claim. I explained that the men who messaged her weren't coworkers or friends. They were people she had been running parallel lives with. Her expression hardened. Not into guilt. Not into shame. But into indignation. She said Griffin misunderstood everything. She said he was clingy and obsessed. She said she only slept with him once, and he blew it out of proportion. Griffin leaned forward quietly. He listed the dates she had seen him. The places. The messages she sent. The conversations where she told him he meant something to her. Her expression cracked for the first time. Then Warren stood up and added his own part. He explained that she had been setting the groundwork for months by describing me as controlling. He said he had heard her talking about me in ways that didn't resemble reality. He mentioned the previous party where she vanished for almost an hour, and how he dismissed it before understanding the pattern. Kendall's reaction wasn't remorse. It was calculation. She tried stitching together a new narrative where all of us misunderstood her intentions. Her explanations twisted and shifted rapidly, contradicting each other every few sentences. She said she was confused emotionally. She said she was depressed. She said people used her kindness. She said she felt disconnected. She said nobody supported her. Every line she offered aimed to rewrite the power dynamic. She wasn't apologizing. She was auditioning for a new version of herself. I didn't respond with anger, because anger would help her cast herself as a victim. I stayed calm. I told her I found the hotel receipts. I told her about the searches on tenant laws. I told her I spoke to the second man whose name had appeared on her screen at the party. I told her he also believed she was recovering from a toxic relationship she had fabricated entirely. Her composure finally broke. Her voice sharpened into frustration. She said I had no right to interrogate her life. She said I had invaded her privacy. She said we were making her look insane. She said we ruined her reputation by confronting her in front of others. She said this was emotional ambush. But then she made a mistake. She said she wasn't cheating. She said she had only slept with 2 people. She said she never intended to hurt me. Griffin stood up silently. He walked toward her and placed his phone on the table. On the screen was a message from Kendall telling him she couldn't wait to see him again. The timestamp was from 2 days before the party. The room fell silent. Kendall's face lost color. Not from shame. From the realization that she had no narrative left to hold on to. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't take responsibility. She didn't apologize. She grabbed her purse, muttered something about needing air, and walked out. The door shut softly behind her. The aftermath wasn't instant. It unraveled over weeks. I removed my name from our lease. The landlord agreed without issue once I explained that Kendall intended to assume the apartment alone. Kendall tried to convince him I was abandoning her, but the landlord dismissed her once I showed proof she had researched removing tenants secretly. She couldn't afford the rent on her own. She stopped inviting people over. She started missing work. Shauna told me that Kendall tried to present herself as the victim of a cruel breakup, but people had already heard different versions of her stories from different men. Her credibility crumbled. She received a workplace warning after someone filed a complaint about inappropriate conduct. Griffin cut all contact. So did the others. She lost every personal anchor she had created. Warren remained solid. He helped me move into a new apartment on the other side of town. For the first time in months, I slept without waiting for another twist.